On the evening of April 3, 2008, the tranquil suburb of Nashville was shattered by the discovery of a horrific murder. What appeared to be a picture-perfect life of a homemaker took a sinister turn, leading to an affair that culminated in bloodshed. The investigation would unveil layers of deception, treachery, and a deadly obsession that left a family torn apart. Elena Rodriguez had always been recognized in her community as the exemplary housewife. At 34, she had 2 kids with her spouse, Miguel Rodriguez, a dedicated construction foreman. They resided in a modest but cozy abode in a serene neighborhood of Nashville, Tennessee. Elena was revered for her kindness and her devotion to her family. On the surface, her life seemed ideal: a loving spouse, 2 beautiful children, and a snug home. However, like many tales that appear perfect, there were dark secrets concealed just beneath the surface. Miguel, 36, had been with Elena for over a decade. He was a man of few words, profoundly committed to his work and his family. His long hours at construction sites often kept him away from home, but he believed it was all worth it to provide a good life for his family. Miguel was proud of what he had established: a stable home, financial security, and a seemingly joyful marriage. Elena's cousin, Victoria, had always been close to her. The 2 women grew up together, practically like sisters, sharing everything from childhood secrets to teenage dreams. Victoria married David Cortez, a successful real estate agent known for his charm and handsome looks. The 2 couples often spent time together, attending family gatherings and neighborhood events. However, over the years, something shifted in Elena. Despite possessing everything she had ever desired, she felt an emptiness growing within her. Miguel was perpetually busy, often leaving before dawn and returning long after sunset. His dedication to his job, while admirable, left little time for Elena, and she began to feel increasingly lonely. Their discussions became brief, mostly revolving around the children or household matters, and the passion that once characterized their marriage had nearly vanished. During this period, David Cortez, Victoria's husband, began to pay more attention to Elena. He was everything Miguel wasn't: charming, attentive, and always ready with a compliment or a flirtatious smile. David had a reputation for being a bit of a ladies' man, but Elena always dismissed his behavior as harmless. However, as Miguel became more absent, Elena found herself attracted to David's charisma. It started innocently enough. At family gatherings, David would make Elena laugh with his jokes, or they would engage in lengthy conversations when Victoria was busy with the kids. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings, something Elena hadn't felt from Miguel in years. The more time they spent together, the more their bond deepened. What began as friendly banter slowly developed into something more, something perilously dangerous. By late 2007, Elena and David had embarked on a fully fledged affair. They were cautious, meeting in secrecy whenever they could, and ensuring that no one would suspect anything. Their relationship was passionate, filled with the excitement of stolen moments and the thrill of being caught. For the first time in years, Elena felt alive, desired, and wanted. Everything came crashing down on April 3, 2008, when Elena Rodriguez was found lifeless in her home by her husband Miguel, who had returned from work earlier than usual. Her body was discovered in the kitchen, lying in a pool of blood with a single stab wound to the chest. Miguel immediately called 911, his voice frantic as he struggled to comprehend the horror before him. The Nashville Police Department arrived at the Rodriguez residence early the next morning. Detective Juan Garcia, known for his meticulous investigative methods, was assigned to the case. The crime scene was examined thoroughly, and while the initial impression indicated a burglary gone wrong, the lack of forced entry and the specific targeting of Elena suggested otherwise. Neighbors were interviewed, but no one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. 2 days later, on April 6, 2008, Detective Garcia began questioning those closest to Elena, starting with her husband, Miguel. Miguel sat across from Garcia in the small, dimly lit interview room at the police station. His face was a mask of grief, his eyes red from days of crying. He appeared genuinely devastated by his wife's death, insisting that he had no enemies and couldn't fathom who would want to harm Elena. When asked about their relationship, Miguel admitted that things hadn't been flawless. Elena had seemed distant in recent months, but he had attributed it to the stress of managing the household and raising their children while he worked long hours. Garcia pressed Miguel about his whereabouts on the day of the murder. Miguel explained that he had been at work all day, leaving early in the morning and returning home around 5 p.m. He provided the names of his colleagues who could confirm his alibi. Garcia followed up with Miguel's employer and co-workers, all of whom confirmed that Miguel had been on the job site from 7 a.m. until nearly 5 p.m. With Miguel's alibi securely established, Garcia turned his attention to Elena's cousin Victoria and her husband David Cortez. The interview took place at the Cortez home, where the couple sat together on their living room sofa, their hands clasped tightly. Victoria was visibly shaken, her voice trembling as she described her relationship with Elena. She spoke of how close they had been, more like sisters than cousins. But in recent months, Victoria had noticed a change in Elena. She had become more withdrawn, less communicative, and seemed to carry a burden that she refused to share. Victoria attributed it to possible marital troubles, but never pressed Elena for details. David Cortez, on the other hand, appeared more composed. He expressed shock at Elena's death and insisted that he couldn't imagine who would commit such an act. When asked about his whereabouts on the day of the murder, David claimed he had been at a business meeting for most of the day. He provided details of the meeting and the names of the individuals who could vouch for him. Detective Garcia noted David's composure throughout the questioning. Unlike Victoria, who was visibly distraught, David seemed in control of his emotions, which struck Garcia as somewhat unusual, given the circumstances. As Garcia concluded the interviews, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than what had been revealed. Victoria's account of Elena's recent behavior hinted at underlying issues, and David's calmness in the face of such a tragedy was unsettling. Garcia knew he had to dig deeper. He instructed his team to verify David's alibi and to keep a close watch on both him and Miguel. As the investigation continued, Detective Garcia and his team worked diligently to piece together the events leading up to Elena Rodriguez's death. On April 8, 2008, their efforts began to yield results when they uncovered a significant lead during a routine examination of Elena's phone records. Garcia noticed a series of text messages that stood out. The messages, which were flirtatious and intimate in nature, were exchanged with a contact saved under an alias. This discovery immediately raised red flags for Garcia, who suspected that these messages could be pivotal in understanding what had transpired. The text revealed a side of Elena that no one had previously known, a passionate, secretive relationship that had been carefully concealed from both her husband, Miguel, and her cousin, Victoria. Garcia ordered his team to trace the number associated with the pseudonym, hoping it would lead to more answers. When the trace came back, the number was linked to David Cortez, Victoria's husband. The revelation shocked Garcia as it indicated that Elena had been involved in an affair with her cousin's spouse for nearly a year. The affair had been conducted with extreme caution. Elena and David communicated primarily through these coded messages and only met in places where they were unlikely to be seen together. Their relationship provided Elena with the attention and affection she craved, but it had also placed her in a precarious situation. The fact that David was married to Victoria and Elena was married to Miguel made their affair a ticking time bomb that could ruin both families. 2 days later, on April 10, 2008, David Cortez was brought back in for questioning. This time, Detective Garcia approached the interview with a different tactic. Armed with the evidence of the affair, Garcia was determined to push David into revealing more. As the interview began, David maintained a calm and composed demeanor, but Garcia wasted no time in confronting him about the text messages. Initially, David denied any wrongdoing, claiming that the messages were harmless and that there was nothing more to them. However, as Garcia pressed him with additional details, David's composure began to falter. The weight of the evidence became impossible to ignore, and under pressure, David finally confessed to the affair. He insisted that their relationship had been intense and filled with passion, but he maintained that it was nothing more than a fling. David claimed he had never intended to leave Victoria and that he had ended the relationship with Elena just weeks before her death. He portrayed the affair as a mistake, something that had spiraled out of control but was now in the past. With this new information, Garcia turned his attention to Victoria. During her questioning, Victoria broke down. She admitted that she had suspected David of infidelity for some time, but had never entertained the idea that it could involve her own cousin. Victoria revealed that she had noticed changes in David's behavior, his frequent absences and secretive phone calls, but she had never confronted him directly. Despite her misgivings, Victoria had believed David's reassurances until Garcia presented her with the truth. The revelation devastated her, but she had no further information that directly implicated David in Elena's murder. Her world was shattered by the betrayal, but she was as much in the dark about the murder as the investigators had been. David was adamant, continuously insisting that he had nothing to do with the murder, but everyone knew the truth. What occurred was that on the morning of April 2008, when Miguel left for work as usual, unaware that his world was about to come crashing down, Elena and David had planned to meet that day. David told Victoria he had a meeting with a client, and Elena sent the children to school, eagerly awaiting David's arrival. She ensured the house was immaculate, her appearance pristine, everything just right for their rendezvous. David arrived at the Rodriguez home around noon. Elena greeted him at the door, and they quickly found themselves in each other's arms. But something happened while they made love. Elena moaned her husband's name, and this changed everything. The mood was ruined, and she suddenly felt a wave of guilt. Clearly, she still loved her husband. What was she even doing? There was a tension in the air, a sense of urgency that neither of them could quite pinpoint. Perhaps it was the mounting guilt or the growing fear of discovery, but their usual passion was tinged with something darker. They had a brief argument. Elena was increasingly paranoid about their affair being exposed. She was no longer comfortable and wanted to end it, while David insisted that they could continue as long as they were cautious. The argument quickly escalated, fueled by jealousy, frustration, and the pressure of their secret. That's when Elena threatened to tell his wife, her cousin, if he didn't agree to leave her alone. In a moment of blind rage, David grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter. What happened next was a blur. Before either realized it, Elena was on the floor, blood pooling around her as the knife fell from David's hand. Panicked, David fled the scene, picking up the knife but not bothering to wipe it down, too consumed by fear to think clearly. He dashed to his car, his mind racing with the realization of what he had done. Elena, the woman he had claimed to love, was now lying dead in her kitchen, life drained from her body. Returning to the case, following these revelations, the investigation took on a new sense of urgency. Detective Garcia and his team worked to gather more evidence that could connect David Cortez to the murder. On April 12, 2008, they made a breakthrough. Surveillance footage from a store near the Rodriguez residence revealed David Cortez in the vicinity on the day of the murder. The footage contradicted David's earlier assertion that he had been at a business meeting during that time. When Garcia investigated further, he discovered that the meeting David claimed to attend had been canceled, unraveling David's alibi. In addition to the surveillance footage, forensic analysis of the crime scene unveiled a partial fingerprint on the back door of the Rodriguez house. The fingerprint matched David's. When questioned, David claimed it must have been left during a prior visit. Garcia was skeptical of this explanation, especially considering the increasing pile of evidence against David. By April 15, 2008, Detective Garcia had amassed sufficient evidence to proceed. The surveillance footage, the fingerprint, the unraveling of David's alibi, and the motive provided by the affair painted a damning picture. Garcia obtained a warrant for David Cortez's arrest. That afternoon, David was taken into custody without incident and charged with the murder of Elena Rodriguez. The arrest sent shockwaves through both families and the entire community. The affair, which had been meticulously concealed for nearly a year, was now exposed, and the repercussions were devastating. David's actions had not only claimed Elena's life, but had also shattered his own marriage and destroyed the trust between two families. As David sat in his cell awaiting trial, the reality of his actions began to sink in. What had started as a secret liaison spiraled into a fatal confrontation, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. As the case prepared to go to trial, the prosecution established a solid case against David Cortez. They portrayed him as a man unable to cope with the pressure of his double life, opting for murder to safeguard his secrets. The defense, however, argued that there was no concrete proof that David had killed Elena and suggested that someone else with knowledge of the affair might have framed him. On May 5, 2008, David Cortez's trial commenced, drawing widespread attention from both the media and the community. The courtroom was filled with individuals eager to see how the case would unfold. Reporters lined the hallways as the trial became a topic of daily conversation in Nashville, Tennessee. The prosecution wasted no time outlining their case against David. They presented a detailed timeline of events supported by a wealth of evidence. The text messages exchanged between Elena and David were pivotal to the prosecution's argument, clearly demonstrating the affair and the escalating tension between the two. These messages illustrated a relationship that had become increasingly volatile in the weeks leading up to Elena's death. Surveillance footage was shown next, capturing David near the Rodriguez home on the day of the murder. This evidence directly contradicted David's claim that he had been at a business meeting, which the prosecution pointed out had been canceled. The footage placed David at the scene when he claimed to be elsewhere, casting significant doubt on his credibility. The prosecution also presented forensic evidence, including the partial fingerprint found on the back door of the Rodriguez house. The fingerprint matched David's, placing him at the scene in a way that couldn't be mistakenly attributed to a previous visit. This physical evidence was essential in linking David directly to the crime. Witnesses were called to testify about the deteriorating relationships between the two couples. Neighbors and friends described how Elena and Miguel had grown distant and how David's behavior had changed as he became more secretive and withdrawn. These testimonies helped establish a motive, suggesting that David was under immense pressure as his affair with Elena began to unravel. Miguel Rodriguez's testimony was one of the most emotional moments of the trial. He recounted the day he discovered his wife's body, his voice heavy with grief and disbelief. He spoke of his shock, not only at her death, but also at uncovering her affair with David. Miguel's testimony added a deeply personal and heartbreaking dimension to the case, reminding everyone of the real human cost of the crime. Victoria Cortez also took the stand. Her testimony was a mixture of betrayal and sorrow. She described how she had always trusted David, but had suspected something was amiss in the months leading up to Elena's death. Victoria discussed her confrontation with David after his arrest when the full extent of his lies became clear. She explained how their marriage, once strong, had crumbled under the burden of his deceit. Victoria's pain was palpable as she recounted how David's actions had shattered their lives. Throughout the trial, the prosecution argued that David Cortez acted out of desperation. Faced with the threat of Elena exposing their affair and ruining his marriage, David chose to silence her permanently. The evidence, both physical and testimonial, presented a picture of a man who had been pushed to the edge and made a fatal decision to protect his secrets. As the trial progressed, the jury listened intently, aware that they were deciding the fate of a man who had torn two families apart. The evidence was overwhelming, and the case against David was compelling. The community watched and waited, knowing that the outcome of this trial would have lasting ramifications for everyone involved. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. David Cortez was found guilty of second-degree murder. The evidence, while circumstantial in some areas, was strong enough to convince the jury of his guilt. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. In the wake of the trial, Victoria filed for divorce from David, leaving behind the life they had built together. She relocated away from Nashville, seeking to forge a new life free from painful memories. Miguel Rodriguez, still grappling with the loss of his wife and the betrayal, continued to live in the home where the tragedy occurred, a constant reminder of the life he once had. The neighborhood, once vibrant and close-knit, was left haunted by the events. Whispers of the affair and murder lingered long after the trial, a cautionary tale of how easily secrets could turn deadly. The story of Elena Rodriguez's tragic death is a stark reminder of the risks of deceit and the lengths individuals will go to protect their secrets. In the end, the affair that was meant to be a secret passion became a fatal obsession. But this is nothing compared to the case where a housewife's secret liaison with a neighbor's son ends in death. The unending family and neighborhood drama continues, so give it a watch and subscribe for more.